Hello, back again with another Shamballa Bags pattern. This time it's the Yanna bag. I've made this before and it's such an easy make. It's brilliant. And to be honest with you, I deliberated whether to make the tutorial because it's so easy. But then I'm aware there's many of you out there that are very nervous about trying new patterns. You don't have so much confidence in yourselves. So I thought by making this tutorial, you'd get to see how it's made, realise that it's not too difficult for you and have a go. So if I inspire you to make it, then that's great. Now there's very few pattern pieces to this. They all come separately, and Sammy, bless her, has given different shapes to make it very easy to join them. I laminate my patterns, and there's a tutorial on my page, on my channel, showing you how I do my patterns, so please take a look. And we've basically got all these that join together, making one huge long piece. So I laminated the two sections and then I just stick together when I'm making it. So you need to cut a piece that long for the exterior, which I've done, which is this. I'm making it in Harris tweed, which I love. And because it's a very loose weave, it frays like the clappers once you cut it. So there's two things you can do. You can overlock it, which is what I usually do, but I couldn't get to my overlocker very easily. So I went round the edges once I'd cut with June Taylor's fray block, and it works a treat. Completely seals the edges and stops them fraying. So that's the main piece. And then also out of the tweed, I've cut two lining contrast bands. These go on the inside at the top. So they're the two pattern pieces that you cut fabric from, and the rest is done by measurement with your ruler. I haven't made my pattern labels yet, so I've just quickly drawn these. But you've got your bottom panel piece for the liner, which is 9 3/4 by 5.5. You've got your zipper pocket piece, which is 12 by 8 3/4. Your slip pocket piece, which is 11 times 7 1/4, and two main panel pieces. These are for the inside, and they are 8.5 times 15 and 3/8 of an inch, and you have two of them. Now I have interfaced everything with a nice medium weights interfacing, and I did actually interface the Harris tweed also. As I said, it's a loose weave, and this just gives it a bit of body and a bit of strength. And then finally we've got all our contrast pieces. Now with the strap, the handle, you cut 20 by 2 3/8 of an inch on the contrast, and also on your main fabric. Because I'm using Harris tweed, I've made a handle before with half vinyl and half tweed, and it wasn't very nice. It was very thick and just wasn't good. So I'm actually making one handle out of all vinyl. So I've made mine extra wide. I've done it 3 inches wide, and I'm actually doing it longer than the pattern at 30 inches. Once I fold it in, it's going to make 1.5 inches wide, so quite a nice wide strap, because I think this bag needs it. And it won't be 30 inches long. With folding it at the ends, we're probably looking at it being about 24 to 26 inches long. Then we've got the twist lock flap. So these are what we're going to use for the twist lock. We need two of them. The exterior bottom panel piece, the pocket facing piece, and then the exterior contrast. This is the bit that goes around the bottom of the bag. So you see, not that many pieces at all really. And then we also need to cut the foam, which I haven't done yet, but I will be doing that shortly. I cut it to the size of the panels because I sew it in and then trim it out of the seams. I don't use fusible foam. It's up to you what you use. as to what you do. So it's your choice entirely. So they're all the pieces, nice and easy, not much hardware either, which I'll show you as we go along. I just itching to get started because I really enjoyed making this bag last time, and I'm looking forward to making it again. So without further ado, I'll crack on with it. I just popped back to show you the foam. When you cut your foam, if you're able to, you need to cut it to the size of the top and bottom panels on the exterior. So it's always worth waiting till you've made your panel, or just add 4 3/8 of an inch onto the bottom. I have cut mine because I had very long narrow roll left and I didn't have one deep enough for it, so I did this way, which is fine because I will sew them separately onto the top and the bottom. It's not a problem. I actually did that last time because I didn't read ahead first and I cut it as the pattern said, then I found out. So it's easily done. But if you can, if you've got a wide enough piece of foam, do make it as big as the bag panels all together. And then of course we've got the bottom panel. So that's the foam cut. I just wanted to come back and say before you went ahead and cut the pieces. The first thing we want to do is prepare the flap for the twist lock. I'm doing a vinyl one. If you're doing one that's woven, you need to follow the instructions for the woven. And I've glued them together and left them to dry. The glue I use is Gutterman HT2 Gutterman Creative, and that's what I always use. But I also use the leather and suede glue by Aleene's, if I'm using leather, suede, etc. So I've glued it together and left it to dry, and now I want to stitch all the way around. Okay, so I've stitched all the way around. I'm just going to snip the threads. Oh, there. Okay, so if you need to trim it up to tidy it up, you can trim yours if you're not happy with the stitching. I'm happy with the stitching, so I'm not going to trim it. The thing you do need to do is, if you're using a dark vinyl, then chances are you'll have white in the layers, which doesn't look that nice. If you can see here, it looks much better when it's dark. So to do that, I've just dropped it. To do that, I use a Sharpie that matches the colour that I've used for the vinyl, and I just colour it in, and you can heat set it with a hairdryer, or like I'm doing, I use textile paint, and this one is Jacquard's Textile Colour 100 Colourless Extender. It's for natural or synthetic fabrics, and it goes on white and it dries clear, and it also doesn't stain, which is great. So if you make a bit of a mess, it doesn't matter. Now plenty of people buy leather paint like this in the particular colour they're doing, but I just buy the colourless one and it covers all. But if you don't want to mess about with the Sharpie, buy the colour that you're using and it will dye the white. It will paint it for you. But I find it much more economical to buy a pack of 48 coloured Sharpies, so you've got more or less every colour under the sun, and then this colourless extender to cover all. So that's the flap ready for making, and we'll be adding the twist lock in a little while. And what we're going to do next is to make the exterior panels. Because my foam is in two pieces, I've basted the foam to the upper panel, and I've just used staples just to clip the foam in places on the contrast panel, which I'll remove after I've done so. And now I'm going to stitch the bottom panel and the top panel together. If your foam is in one piece, join these together first before you add your foam. Okay, so we're going to stitch at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Thread break. Okay, I had a thread break, so I've re-threaded and carried on. And now I'm going to remove the foam from the seam allowance. I've trimmed the foam out of the seam allowance, and now I'm going to top stitch on the contrast band, making sure that the seam is facing down. Just keep feeling that it is facing down, making sure. So there we've stitched across. So if you haven't already done so, now's the time to add your foam to your panel piece. Obviously, if you, like me, you did it like me, then you don't need to. But now is the time. And then once you've base stitched your foam, or however you're attaching it, we need to sew these two ends together. And the most important piece to get right is to match up this level, because it would look really odd, stick out like a sore thumb if it's not matching. So I want to match it up. And I'm just going to use my micro stitch gun to match them up and stop it moving. And I just want to make sure that that hasn't moved. Yeah, I'm happy with where it is. And I'm going to micro stitch them together. You could use clips or whatever you have that you prefer. I just don't want the seam from, to move at all. So that's why I'm using my micro stitch gun. That way it won't move once it's in the machine. Okay, so I've just micro stitched it all together, and now I'm going to put it in the machine and stitch at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Got quite a good seam allowance. And thread the needle in the machine. Oh my giddy aunt. Okay, let's start again, shall we? Now I'm going to check that it's lined up properly in here. And yes, I'm happy with that. So now I'm going to trim the foam out of the seam. I've trimmed the foam out of the seam allowance, and I've used double-sided tape to open up and fix the seam open, because now we're going to top stitch. And I'm not going to be able to film me top stitching this, but you have to maneuver it and just stitch through carefully, like so. So I can show part of it. So and it's just a case of moving it and do it the best way you can see. Let's see how we've done. This is where you keep your fingers crossed that it looks okay. And that's just one side, obviously. We've got the other side to do yet. But you can't see it, but I can. Okay, I'm going to do the other side and then come back. Right, I've just turned it right side out for you to just see that the seam I've stitched either side. And this is where I said it's most important for it to be level. And before I go any further, I'm going to also pop my handmade label on to there. So I shall do that now and then come back. So now this is ready. I've put my handmade label on the front, and we've got the bag base. I haven't added the foam yet. I will be doing that in a little bit. I will actually be sewing it to the bag without the foam added. The feet will actually keep the foam anchored to the bottom. What I've done is I've marked the spots for the feet, and I did that by, I measured the seam of the base, which is 1/4 of an inch all the way round, and then I went 1 inch in from both and marked a dot. I did that, and I was going to put 6 feet on, and then I decided I'm actually only going to put 5 on. So I've got the dots there, and then this I've made one right in the middle. So that's all ready to go, and I need to just cut holes. I'm not adding the feet yet because they'll just get in the way. I'll add the feet once I've added the base, but I'm just going to cut the holes. If I was adding the screw feet, then I would have punched holes, but these are the feet with prongs, so they just need the slits to be made. So I've done that, and we need to mark the halfway point on the base. It's 9 3/4 long, so we've got 4 1/2 for the 9, and then 1/4 and 1/8. So it's 4 7/8 of an inch for the halfway. Just going to double check that that's right. Yep. And do it both sides. 4 7/8. And we also want to mark the halfway point along the short edge as well, which is 5 1/2, so that's 2 3/4. Okay, now obviously we've got the halfway point on the bag already where the seam is, and I just want to mark the halfway point for the other side, which I'm going to cheat and use the seam to mark it so that it's like that. And I'm going to mark the halfway just by pressing down on it, basically, so that we've got the halfway mark there. And going to turn this back right to the wrong side. And I'm just going to use my stapler to add this. And join at the 4 points first. Okay, and I'm going to just staple in a couple of places. And when we stitch, we're going to stop 1/4 of an inch from the end. I'll show you when we come to do it. So those in place. Honestly, using staples makes life so much easier. Okay, so we're going to stitch along, starting at the 1/4 inch in and finishing 1/4 of an inch towards the end. Oh, I meant to say that we're actually stitching the short ends first before we stitch the long ends. So just want to make sure that we've got that. I'm going to remove one of the staples actually that are along the side because it's hampering a little bit. We'll see how easy it is to remove the staples. She says. And I'm going to remove, oh no, I haven't got one on that side, so that's good. Okay, so as I said, we start 1/4 of an inch in. And it's quite handy that I've got the line drawn. See how easy it is because we've got the staples holding it all together. There's no fiddling about and having it shift on us. So that's that end sewn. And the same with this end. Just want to make sure that's flat. And then once we've done that, we can now sew the long sides just want to make sure and the same with the other side. Trying to make sure it's in the right place. So that's that. I just went a bit wonky there, so I'm just going over it. So I was too busy looking at this bottom corner to notice that I just went off slightly, so I wanted to straighten that up. So before I remove the staples, I'm just going to test it to see how it looks, to make sure that I'm happy with how it's stitched and so on, and that the corners are all sewn and there's no holes. So there's the bottom, and all the corners are nice and smooth. And now I'm going to add the foam and the feet. The bag is very soft at the bottom, so I've decided I want to give it a bit more strength than just the foam. So I'm going to add some glue onto some Peltex. I'm going to add quite a bit of glue. Because it really needs it. And I don't add it to the vinyl because literally these lines I'm making would burn into the vinyl and you'd see it. So the best thing to do is to add this to the Peltex and then spread it with an old store card or whatever card you have lying about. And I did cut this and measure it to size. I made sure that it fitted properly. And then I insert it into the bag. It's tucking it in. That's got that in there. And I'm going to leave that to dry and then come back. So it dried, and then I did exactly the same with the foam. I've glued the foam to the Peltex, and I'm leaving that to dry. And whilst that's drying, we're going to work on the twist lock. So I've got the piece I made earlier on, and we need to mark. Oh, excuse me, I'm yawning. I have no idea what time it is. Probably about 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay, we need to mark, just looking for the best side, if there is a best side. That's the best side. So yeah, marking 1 inch from the bottom. And I'm looking for my lock. We need to add the female part of the lock, which is this part, the part with the hole, and the edge of the lock has to be on the line. And I'm just eyeing it up. That looks about even, so I'm just going to measure it. 1/2 inch. Tiny fraction of 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to draw the circle for the hole that I need to cut and mark for the screws. And I'm going to now measure to make sure it's even. So that's 3/4 inch from one edge to the other. And 3/4 inch, so I'm happy with that. Get rid of that mark. Now it's up to you how you punch it. You might have a proper die for punching this size hole. You might want to use a craft knife, or you might just want to punch lots of holes in it until you get the right size. I'm going to use my craft knife, and I'm just going around the outer edge of the line that I drew. And I cut very carefully. And going around the curves, rather than moving the knife, you just move the material. Like so. So there's the hole that I've made. I just want to check that I'm happy with the hole. Yep. I just need to make the holes for the screws. I'll show you what I've done when I've done it. Okay, so that's what it looks like. And if you see here, the screw holes will sit in there nicely. And if you need to adjust them, you can do so. I'm pretty happy. I'm just going to adjust the hole. I'm going to measure just to make sure I'm adjusting the right one for fit. So just over 1/2 inch. They're both the same. So it's worth taking your time. You can't rush these things. Right, let's see how we get on now. Put the lid on. That's the back. Now, you can, if you want to, you can glue it. I don't. I've never really found the need to. And when I've actually gone wrong on a bag and I've had to take it all the hardware off to throw it away, it comes off very easily, even if you have glued it. So that's why I don't glue it anymore, because if it wants to come off, it will. So that's the female part of the lock added, like so, and then the male part will go through like that. So I'm not going to fit her just yet because she's still drying, so I will come back when she is dry to proceed. Right, so the foam dried, and where I'd marked the slits earlier, I just put the knife back through to cut the holes for the foam and the Peltex, and then I put the feet in. And now I've just put some glue on some more Peltex to put over the feet so that you don't fill them through the lining. And we'll just place that on all of them. Which I will show you in a second. There. So there we have it, all covered nicely. And that's the exterior done, apart from adding the twist lock flap, which we'll do when the Peltex is dried in there, because I don't want it falling off. So while we wait for that, I thought we could get started on the lining, so I shall be back shortly with the first steps of the lining. Apologies, the part where I show to add the flap didn't come out on the video, and I actually did forget to add this part, so I remembered and had to unpick the lining part and just add that in, which was easy enough to do. But I am sorry, you'll have to follow the written instructions on how to add this. It's very easy to stitch it onto the back panel, so yeah, apologies for that. We need to get the two main panels for the lining and the contrast panel, and we sew them together. So we put them right sides together and we stitch along at 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm doing both of them. We need to open them up and press with the seam pointing downwards. And then we top stitch. So that's both of them top stitched along the top. Now we want to add the zipper pocket. So we get one panel piece and we want to place the zipper strip about 3/8 of an inch below the band here. But I bear in mind that I have my label that I like to add above it. So I'm going to add it slightly lower. First thing I do is put double-sided tape along the outer edges of the box, which I will show you in a second because I'm aware that it's not in the screenshot. Okay, so we've put double-sided tape along the zipper facing. What I did earlier on as well is I painted along the edges on the inside as well, and I did the Sharpie pen and then the paint as well. Just in that I just missed a tiny bit. That's got it. So I'm going to remove the tape just off the one side, and I want to measure so that's 15 inches and this is 8, so that's 3.5 inches each side. And I'm measuring 1/2 inch down. think that looks even. It's just slightly slanting up a little bit. No, that should be okay. Yeah. And then peel the tape off the other side. And lay that nice and straight. And then we're going to go and stitch around the outside box. So we've stitched all the way around the outside of the box. And now we need to cut away the fabric from inside the stitching. And I put my scissors away thinking that I didn't need them, completely forgetting that I was going to be doing this. I need to go and find them. Found them, they were on the floor. Okay, so we trim away to about 1/8 of an inch away from the stitching. Okay, so now we get the zip that I've already placed my zipper pull on, and I put some double-sided tape along the top and the bottom of the zip. That wants to misbehave. Okay, you can add it sometimes I add it to the box. Depends on you. I mean, really, it doesn't matter which way you do it. Do it whichever way you feel comfortable doing. And then lay the box over, trying to make it as evenly placed. Remove the tape on the other side. It's really important to get this down as evenly as you can, because just being slightly off centre and it sticks out like a sore thumb. Okay, turn that over, and now lay some double-sided tape along the bottom where you've stitched the initial box. And then get your zipper pocket piece and lay the edge on the tape, and now we're going to take it to the machine and just stitch along the bottom row. Okay, so I've just stitched along the bottom there, made sure that the pocket was sitting upwards like so, and now we turn it back over, bring the pocket down, just finger press, and then lay some double-sided tape along the top row of stitching that you did. And now we're going to take it to the machine and stitch the side along the top and down the side. So there we stitched around the box, and now we just need to stitch the sides of the pocket. So we've stitched the sides, and now we have our pocket. And I'm going to add my label, and that's that side of the lining done, and it's onto the slip pocket next. Now we're going to make the slip pocket for the other lining panel, and we fold the slip pocket in half to short edge, and just finger press along there, and we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we stop going across, leave a couple of inches and continue. I always double stitch on corners just to give it some added strength, so that when we're pushing the corners out we don't go through. And then we just need to cut the corners. Like that. And then turn it right side out through the gap that we left. And we just get my tool that I use to push the corners out with. I mean, you can use anything, knitting needle, crochet hook, so long as it's got a rounded end and not sharp. And then just gently push the corners out. Push out with my finger, it's just not quite wanting to go, so I want to coax it with my finger first. That's better. And then I give it a press. Making sure that the seams aren't folding in on themselves. And press the top. And what I like to do as well is fold the bottom seam in where the gap is and press that, which will make it easier for stitching closed. And I just like to use a little bit of double-sided tape. That's it, I'm chucking everything on the floor. Like so. So that will stay there now until we stitch it. So all we need to do now is top stitch across the top. And that's the slip pocket made, ready to put onto the lining. Okay, so I've measured and I've just done 1/2 inch below the band seam, and I've placed it centrally. It's basically 4 1/4 inches either side, and we're going to stitch it on. And I always go over a couple of times at the top. And I reinforce the corners with a couple of extra stitches. So that's a slip pocket added, and I'm going to add a rivet in each corner just for the reinforcement. So now I've put the two sides together, the lining sides together, right sides together that is. We're going to start stitching at 1/4 inch seam allowance, then go out to 1/2 inch. Then we're going to stop and give a good gap for turning the bag, and then carry on stitching. So 1/4 inch to start with, and then move out so that we're stitching at 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to leave quite a good gap to make it easier to turn the bag. And then when we get to the bottom, we need to come back to 1/4 inch seam allowance so that everything fits when adding the base. And the other side, we can just go ahead and stitch all the way up. So starting at 1/4 inch, and then moving out to 1/2 inch, all the way up to the top. And then as we near the top, move across to stitch at 1/4 inch. That's so that the exterior and lining fit together. I just want to add that as we did with the outer, you need to make sure that these panels match up when you're joining the lining. So start with there and then pin the rest. Once you've sewn your sides together, remembering to leave a fairly well sized gap, 5 or 6 inches, you need to mark your halfway points between the seams here and the halfway points on your lining bottom panel piece. And by doing that, I folded these in half and creased and then just marked a line, and I did it at the 4 points and I marked both sides in the halfway. Of course, we've got the seams that mark halfway on here. And the other thing we just need to do is to mark 1/4 of an inch on the short ends, just to let us know that that's where we need to stop, as we did with the exterior bottom panel. So we're just marking it like so. We don't need to worry about marking the long ends, as we will be continuing straight on. So we join right sides together, and we open the seam up, and then we can, oh, it's come out. We continue round. I'm going to come back to you when I've pinned it and I'm ready to sew. What I've done is pinned the end. I've just pinned at the 2 ends for now, and then once I've stitched that, I'll pin the edges. It just makes it easier to sew these ends. And remembering that we're starting at 1/4 of an inch in, which is where I've placed the pin. Going to remove those pins so I don't get stabbed, and then do the other end. So that's the end sewn, and now I'm going to pin the long edges and get ready to sew them. Okay, so I've gone along the ends, and now I want to easier from doing it at the back. Actually, it's easier doing it looking at the base. And I've just noticed, I just think that's a bit short there, so I'm just going to sew that little bit extra to close that corner. So do check that you've got your corners nice and closed, so you're not going to get any little holes peeking through. just stitching that corner. There we have it. I'm just going to unpin everything and come back to you in a moment. I checked my lining, I was happy. I must admit, I saw the raw edges and I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't catch it all in. Then I remembered it's the size seam entry. So yeah, don't worry if you see that. Okay, so we want to put the exterior into the lining. So the lining stays inside out, the exterior is right side out, and we put it in so that the zip is at the back of this, of the exterior. So we fit it in, and it will go. You might think, oh my goodness, it's not going to fit, but it will. And what you need to do is get it to fit where it dips. You're matching with the seam, and so on. I'm going to do this, pin it, and then come back to you. I've pinned it all the way around, and I'm now going to stitch at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. The way I have to do it, I have to take this off my machine and so on, so it's a bit awkward to sew and it's awkward to film, so I'm not going to film it, but that's what we do. Once you've stitched around the top, just check that you're happy inside, that it's stitched everywhere as well and everything's caught in. I'm going to remove the foam from the seam, and then I'm going to trim the seam and also put notches where we need to, such as places like this, which will help with when we've turned for it to be smooth. I have clipped that way and then I've trimmed the seam, but those of you who are dressmakers will know this, but if you trim both seams together, you're going to end up with a chunky ledge inside as such. If you just trim one seam, which I've done, it kind of tapers it. Instead of being like that and having that chunk like that, it's tapered, so it's just smoother. So that's what I do. And now we need to turn it right side out. So I can't do this, it's too difficult for me with my arthritis, so I'm going to ask my husband to turn this right side out and then I'll come back. Okay, so I went round inside and I clipped all the edge, and then I trimmed one side of the seam. If you trim both pieces together, you're going to end up with like a ridge inside like that. If you only trim one, then it's going to be much more streamlined. It's just going to be a nicer finish. That's something I always did in dressmaking. You trim the layers separately. So just trim back one layer and leave the other layer as it is, and then obviously you've clipped all the way round. I did film it, but unfortunately it didn't come out very well at all. I didn't realise the camera was zoomed right in, and it was very blurred and you couldn't see anything, so I deleted that part, which is why I'm explaining now. I've already sewn it, unfortunately, so I can't show it to you, but take my word for it. Clip downwards towards the seam all the way around, and then just trim one edge back, one layer of seam back, and then I close the edge that was open, and then we just need to push it in. Now I have a video on here that shows how to top stitch effectively, nicely. Please do take a look at it, and I promise you'll get much better results. So there's the bag ready for top stitching. I'm going to go off and top stitch it, and I will come back to do the strap. So I've top stitched all the way around. I'm very happy with that. I love her. I just love this pattern so much. I admit, because I've used Harris tweed, I'm going to have a little bit of an issue with the grommets because this is so thick, but I'm determined to do it. So the next thing we need to do is the strap, which I'm doing a bit different to the pattern because you're meant to use basically both fabrics, but I knew this would be too thick, so I'm just doing a very wide strap. This is 6 inches wide and I've cut it 30 inches long. Once I've made it, I'll decide, actually, looking at it, yeah, I may cut it a little bit. But yeah, so I'm going to go and get everything I need and come back. For my strap, I've measured 6 inches across, 30 inches long. If you want to go ahead and do the strap with the measurements given in the tutorial, by all means do. I've also cut a piece of Peltex that's 26 inches long and 1 3/8 of an inch wide, just a shy of 1.5 inches. The reason being is if I did it exactly 1.5 inches, we don't have any room to fold. It's taking up more than we have. So I just want to mark 2 inches from each end to let me know where I need to fold to, etc. Or lay the Peltex, should I say, actually. I've also drawn a line along the centre. And I get some of my very strong double-sided tape. And I'm aware not all of this will be on the video because this is very long. And I'm just going to lay some tape about 1/2 inch or so below the line I've drawn. Scissors. And remove the backing. And lay the Peltex. And I'm going to lay it very, very slightly below the line that I've drawn, which I'll show you in a moment. So you see how far away it is. And I'm just going to snip the end as it's slightly long. And now I just want to fold the edges over first. So I shall lay some tape, my trusty friend. I shall lay it at both ends. And I'm just going to draw a line 1/2 inch up from the edge. show me where to fold to. Do that at both ends. And remove the tape backing. If it will allow you to. And just fold up to that line. And I'll get my roller. And do it at both ends. This is so that we don't have any ugly raw edges. Now we're going to lay some more double-sided tape. Along the outer edges. Like so. I kept getting the backing off, it kept flipping back down again. And fold it over to the centre line. And this is why we reduced the Peltex a little bit, so that we could have we could fold over to the line. It wasn't too bulky. And do the same on the other side. There we go. And then finally, a bit more tape. I'm just going to put some tape on the end as well, because it's quite a wide strap. Okay, let's peel the tape off, or the backing tape. Goodness me, keep getting it and letting it go. And take the end ones off as well. There we go. Okay. There we go. And I'm going to take this to the machine and stitch it. Okay, here's the strap. I did film it, but I'd knocked the camera slightly, so I filmed the top of my machine instead of the bed of the machine. But that's the strap made. And because I left the 2 inches at the end, or 1 3/4 inches now, when I fold it over it's not so bulky, which will make it easier than had I left Peltex. It would have been really chunky. So that's the strap made. Like so. Now for the grommets. Okay, so what we need to do to mark the holes is get our ruler and mark 3/8 of an inch in from this edge, not them, from that edge, which I did, and then 1 3/4 inches along. And I made sure that my ruler was straight by placing the bag edges along the grid there, then placing my ruler and making sure it was straight along the edge. So I've now got my Grommet Punch. Now the hole I'm doing is 14mm. Now the hole for the grommet is 10. The reason I'm doing a much larger hole is because of the thickness of the fabric and the type of fabric. If I was doing a thinner fabric, such as cotton, I'd have stuck with the 10mm. But I do need it to be bigger. Right, so I want to make sure that it's definitely flat, and I'm just getting an idea of the size. And then I need to cut down, but I probably have to stand up. That's it. And really put my back into it. And that's gone through all the layers. And then do the same again on this side. I tell you, it's quite nerve-wracking putting holes into your bag. Right, I hope that's right. Okay, so not quite gone through the layers on this side, so I just use the scissors to finish the job. Like so. Now before I go any further, I want to get my June Taylor's fray block just to stop the fabric from fraying. It really is quite crucial. If you haven't used a light weave fabric, then you'll be okay. And then I shall do the same and mark the same for the other holes, and then I shall come back when they're dry. I have gone ahead and added the grommets apart from the last one, so I wanted to show you. We've got the hole that we made, but you also need to make 2 tiny holes next to each side for the screws of the grommet, unless you're adding a force fit grommet. So I just use my hole punch to just punch a couple of holes, not too wide. You don't want to go too far out, or you'll end up with some gaps with the fabric. So I just make sure that they've cut out where I want them to. And I added a lot of the fray block just so that it didn't fray when I added the holes. So just like that, I don't know if you can see the 2 holes. And then I get my grommet, which I should have prepared first. And we unscrew the holes in the grommet, of course. Oh, goodness me, all 6s and 7s. It's not turning for some reason. It's really stuck in there. I think I've got it. Sometimes you will get a grommet that doesn't want to shift, and you just have to persevere with it, as I have done. Goodness me. It's really stubborn. I was told that sometimes the lacquer stops them from opening when they've put the lacquer on the grommets. The screws get sort of glued onto it, but this one is coming out now at last. Okay, so you can see it's worth persevering. And then I push the grommet in it, and I just move the fabric out of the way to then put the back on. And I screw the first one in. I don't screw it all the way, and then I just line up the second one. as you can see, it's quite easy to add them once you've got it going. Okay, so that's the grommets added. Now, there's a couple of types of different rings. There's what we call a spring ring, where the ring springs down, or there's the gate screw rings. Oh my goodness, which these are. Now I'm going to use these ones because they're a bit bigger, so they give more room to manoeuvre. I'm going to find a different size screwdriver. I'm not having much luck today with screws. Maybe it's me. Let's try different ones. I might have to get my husband to look at that for me. Maybe it's my strength today. See, that one's unscrewing fine. So, with the gate screws, as you can see, we have 2 screws. And, oh, that's broken my nail, great. And we just put it in. Now, you can do the bag a number of ways, or 2 ways. You can do that and put the ring in through there. I prefer to do this because I like the shape of the bag. So I'm doing this. I'm going to screw it on and then I'll come back. Right, now we're adding the strap. I've added the rings, as you can see. Oops, sorry. As you can see, they look lovely. Right, to add the rivets and I'm adding clasp. Rather than adding this straight into the ring, I decided to add a clasp. So I slipped the clasps on, and what I did was I marked a hole 1/2 inch from the end, and I did 2 holes, fold it over where I want it to be, put my pen in there to mark the other holes, and then cut them. I never do all the layers together, because when you do all the layers together you can go off at different angles and then it doesn't look good. And I'm using the longest rivets I've got, which are 9mm. They just do it. And then I need to get the cap. And then I use my wonderful green machine, and without which I would not get good results. Okay, so that's 1 rivet on. That's 2. And that's the bag done. So, if I can zoom out, add the strap, and there we have my Yanna bag. I am so pleased with that. I will upload photos as well. And I hope you found this tutorial easy to follow. Apologies again about not showing the how to do the flap, but hopefully you got on with doing it through the tutorial. Till the next one, happy stitching everyone. Bye.